background about the book. This is really the second rendition. The first rendition was called Kiakaha, and I had written that some time ago, and it's funny, I met Jack Tater, who owns PeopleSoft Publishing, and we've known each other for years through a company we used to work for. And he said, gee, I'm a publisher. And I said, oh, what do you publish? And he brought me some books, and I said, well, I self-published a novel. He said, oh, let me read it. And he read it, and he's like, oh my God, I love this. You need to rework it. I said, okay. He said, first we have to change the name. And I said, okay. So we changed the name, and we called it The Unholy Ghost. The genesis of The Unholy Ghost was when I was on a trip with a bunch of high school students. I'm sure you're all familiar with People to People. It's an organization where kids travel around the world as cultural ambassadors from the United States, although their parents are paying. And I was on tour in New Zealand, and I was struck by our tour guide, who had this crazy story he told me about his life, and I thought, wow, someone's got to write a novel about this. And that's what got the ball rolling. And I thought, it would be so interesting to write something that talks about all the spiritual experiences I've had, as well as that balance between fate, destiny, and free will. And also learning about yourself, right? Because the hardest thing is to understand who you are. And often our actions are colored by our experiences versus surrendering to whatever moves people ahead, and then just sort of going where the flow takes you, because we're always pushing, we're shoving, we're resistant. And so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if two people sort of had a spark, but weren't sure if they should really be together, right? So is it destiny for them to be together? Are they going to fight against it? And is it really for the greater good that they are together? So that's pretty much where the book goes. Now, this book deals a lot with spirituality, with Catholicism, with some spiritual practices, breath practices, and it's really a spiritual thriller. It's the true story of good versus evil, and that's a theme that's in a lot of stories. And it's really about how primarily everything is good, and it's how you see it, and how your ego can hijack who you are and turn things around and bring you to the dark side. So I thought I'd read a couple of excerpts. The first one is chapter 1, and that really sets the stage. The main character is Sarah, and she's on tour with these students and three other chaperones. And so then there's Sarah, and she meets John, and John is the other main character. And are they destined to be together? Aren't they going to be together? Then I'll read a chapter about another very evil character in the book called the Bruja, but I'm not going to give away too much about the Bruja. So let's start with chapter 1. Chapter 1. Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. Matthew 22:37, King James Version. New Zealand. Sarah, the other chaperones, and the students had just disembarked from an 18-hour flight from LA to Auckland, New Zealand. She had taken 2 Tylenol PM and dozed sporadically for a few hours, but not soundly. As she'd been doing for 3 years, Sarah was chaperoning with an organization whose sole purpose was to provide children with a cultural exchange experience away from their parents. It was partially to satisfy her wanderlust, partially to get relief from her suffocating relationship, and she was always on the lookout for a possible rush. Sarah and the other chaperones devoted weeks to preparing the children and their parents for their eventual departure, and they had finally arrived. Good day, I'm John, your delegation manager. I'm Sarah, nice to meet you. He grabbed her hand and delivered a firm and powerful handshake while looking deeply into her eyes. A man in his late 40s, John had a solid build, his muscles outlined under his polo shirt. About 6'1", his eyes were a piercing Caribbean blue, iridescent in his tanned face. He looked not at her, but through her, exposing her vulnerabilities. She couldn't hide from his stare. She was transfixed in a timeless place, just her and this man. Do we know each other? She asked, feeling as if she had always known him. Oh, perhaps in a past life, if you believe such rubbish. He winked and chuckled. Are you the head leader? He inquired, bringing her back to the present moment. Oh no, that would be Greta over there. Hey Gret, come over and meet your delegation manager. John was assigned as tour guide and bus driver to the 40-plus high school students chosen as cultural representatives for the United States. In Sarah's view, it wasn't much a cultural exchange program as it was a chance for rich kids to get away from their parents for a month. However, in Sarah's professional opinion, the kids reaped the rewards of building autonomy, responsibility, increased self-esteem, and cultural sensitivity. Greta, a large woman in her 50s, although leader in name, assumed only mild control over the group of teenagers and 3 chaperones so as not to offend anyone. Her biggest fear in life was not being liked. John gave her a hearty "good day," and she began regaling him with non-stop stories of having been to New Zealand and Australia several times prior to this trip, which included the story of the love affair her last leader had with their tour manager, of which she had been unaware. Greta delivered this stream of chatter with a Brooklyn accent at a very high decibel level, even though she was thoroughly a Jersey girl. John politely listened while escorting the delegation to the bus. He had a feeling that this was going to be a very long ride. Cheryl, also a chaperone, mouthed to Sarah that John was nice. A single woman in her 50s, Cheryl perceived life as running out and was ever alert to a possible romance. John seemed like fair game, handsome, well-preserved, sexy accent, charming at first blush. "He's really nice," said Cheryl when they were seated on the bus out of John's earshot. "Yeah, he seems cute, but he's bald. Not into bald guys," Sarah responded, although she was struck by their initial encounter. Of late, Sarah was more into guys in their 20s and early 30s, for fantasy's sake anyway. It had been a long time since she considered a fantasy with an older man, which used to be her man of choice. Upon seeing John, the familiar pleasant feelings of being with an older man echoed within her. At first this puzzled her because she hadn't felt them in such a long time, but then their familiarity came back. She guessed that John was a good 8 to 10 years older than her. "Well, bald guys do have more testosterone," said Laura with a wide grin and a wink. Laura, a Native American in her 40s, had beautiful straight black hair. Her olive-colored, moon-shaped face was punctuated by giant turquoise green eyes, the color of the opals she collected. She was considered blunt, always telling it the way it was, even more than Sarah. Laura, Cheryl, and Sarah shared a private counseling practice in the bucolic setting of Hunterdon County, New Jersey. Their practice served middle and upper middle income families with adolescents who were referred directly from the local high school. Cheryl was an addictions counselor, Sarah combined spirituality-based and cognitive behavioral counseling, and Laura delivered harsh doses of reality therapy. They chaperoned annually to get away from the practice and to experience the world for free, although they came to learn that everything has a price. Greta, an ineffective ex-German teacher, continued her shrilling of endless repetitive stories that the 3 of them had heard numerous times in the 2 years they had traveled with her. While on the bus, and still obsessed with her previous New Zealand-Australian delegation, she felt it necessary to continue to bore John with the details of her last leader's affair. "And Felix, this good-looking Australian delegation leader, was flirting heavily with Karen, one of my chaperones." Nothing wrong with a little flirty, eh?" John responded and smiled at Cheryl, who immediately flushed and gave Sarah a thumbs up while John wasn't looking. Greta continued, insisting that her story be heard. "Yeah, well, this flirty ended up with Karen telling her lawyer husband, a county prosecutor I might add, that she wanted a divorce as soon as she landed at Newark. Can you believe it? She was sleeping with him, or who knows what, the whole time on the trip, and everybody knew except me. Even the kids knew. They wrote about it in their evaluations. Well, who knows what'll happen on this trip, right? I'll tell you, maybe Cheryl." John cut her off, saving Cheryl from any embarrassment, and said, "There's no lack of opportunity for tour guides. One of the other guys in my company received a $30,000 check from an old woman as a tip." "That must have been quite a tour," snickered Sarah. Greta shook her head in disgust. "So, John, is this your first tour?" asked Cheryl. "No, actually my second this summer with your outfit. After this, I go to Brisbane for some meetings and back here." "Oh, do you do this full time?" Cheryl was running on all cylinders trying to get information from him. This wasn't lost on Sarah, but she was getting impatient. She wanted to know if he was married, had kids, had ever had an affair while married, the important stuff, but Cheryl was using the lazy river approach. "Oh, no, only part of the year. I had to take early retirement from the New Zealand police about 6 years ago." "Why? What happened?" interjected Sarah. "Well," he hesitated. "Oh, if it's too painful to discuss, we'll understand," Cheryl said solemnly. Sarah rolled her eyes at this, feeling John wanted an audience for the story he was about to tell, and the "well" was a way to whet their appetites. No, not too painful. "It was 6 years ago," he began to reminisce. "I'd been with the Kiwi police my whole life, and as a result, they put me through a lot of training. I'm a trained AOS member, as well as having been part of the Diplomatic Protection Squad, where I learned individual protection protocol, body training. Woohoo! Individual protection protocol, how fancy, mocked Sarah with a phony upper-class accent. Sounds like a security guard to me. Laura gave her a gentle push, signaling her to shut up. John, please go on. And what does AOS stand for? Asked Cheryl. Armed Offender Squad, like America's SWAT team. Anyway, I was in command of a team, and a call came in that a bank robbery was in progress and the possibility of hostages being taken. So I was to lead the team that would nab the robbers and free the hostages. When we arrived, we positioned ourselves around the bank and on the roof. Negotiators were there trying to contact the robbers so the incident could be ended peacefully. 5 of us went in. We cut the lights so it was very dark. And even though we wore infrared glasses, it was very confusing. The robbers had set off a number of gas canisters which created a thick fog. I got separated from the team, but I knew we had to end up in the main lobby of the bank where the hostages were. As I was taking up a position along a corridor leading into the main vestibule, I heard the robbers talking. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I turned the corner and told them, "Drop your weapons and freeze!" They immediately began shooting at me. I had my vest on, but I got hit in the leg. Before I went down, I squeezed off several rounds at them and hit a few, killing one. The bullet that hit me shattered my leg, hence early retirement. John hoped this edited version would satisfy their curiosity. So I was out at 42 with full benefits and can now spend time with lovely people like yourselves, he said, grinning. Well, that's quite a story, said Cheryl. It must have been traumatic to kill someone, she said with great dread in her voice, imagining that he would need a lot of therapy and TLC to heal. Oh, not really. When you're in the thick of it, you only think about saving your ass. I've never really thought about it any other way. It was either me or them. Don't you miss all the action? After all, this kind of life seems pretty boring compared to what you're doing for a living, said Cheryl. Well, yes, it is, which is why I'm considering going to Iraq in October, he said, then pausing, waiting for a reaction. He must be divorced, Sarah thought. Who could be in a relationship with a guy who's never around and suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, even if he doesn't know it? Cheryl continued. Iraq? She paused. To fight or just to visit? She said with subtle sarcasm. No, he said seriously. To work for Red Tide, a private military company that trains Iraqi police and provides bodyguards to foreign contractors. The Kiwi police spent a fortune training me to do this kind of work, and I want to do it. Besides, it pays extremely well, upwards of $1,000 a day, depending on who you're protecting. One year there, plus my other investments, and I won't have to work another day in my life. If you survive, interjected Sarah. John smiled. Cheryl shot a warning glance at Sarah for interrupting her rhythm. She continued her meandering questioning. I see. What makes you want to go besides the money? Sarah thought it was simply a death wish. Freud referred to it as Eros versus Thanatos. People have an inherent drive to seek love and death. The excitement, the adrenaline rush, now more so than ever that I'm retired. The time was never right to do something like Iraq. Timing is everything, you know. Now it will work even though I have a very small window of opportunity. I'm turning 50 soon, and if I wait much longer, they won't want me. I'll be too old. Cheryl shook her head sympathetically. Wants to die young, thought Sarah. For Cheryl, the Iraq element put a crimp in her fantasy. Could she live with him in Iraq? It was a dangerous country, and she didn't relish that he would probably return in a body bag. Being a therapist, though, was also raised a red flag. Why would someone like John want to put himself in harm's way? He couldn't possibly be married. What wife or girlfriend, for that matter, would put up with such a risky venture? Instead of asking him these penetrating questions, she clung to her fantasies and continued with the tea chatter. After your last tour group, what will you be doing until you go to Iraq? Oh, I'm a silent partner in a jet boat racing business in Turkey. Since I retired, I spend a great deal of time there doing our off-season jetting, which is about from June until September. I'll do that while I'm waiting to be chosen. Oh, you haven't been chosen yet, Sarah perked up, now seeing this whole story might be somehow an ego play for attention from 4 women. She loved nothing more than to zero in on someone's vulnerabilities and white lies. No, he said, waving a hand as if shooing off a fly. I need to put my name in the hat. That's why I'm going to Brisbane. I'm meeting with the company that's doing the hiring. I am confident that they'll want me because of my experience. I imagine there won't be much competition. Too dangerous, he said, looking off in the distance the way a superhero would at the end of the movie after having saved humanity. Sarah felt herself attracted and repelled by his self-assuredness. She thought it was foolhardy to consider taking such a risk, but admired the fact that, at his age, he was considering it. Laura slept with the whole conversation and would have to be filled in later. Greta tisk, tisk, tisk for the potential loss of life. Satisfied that he underwent the interrogation satisfactorily, John set his mind to driving, having no doubt that the ladies would want more for him. This was just a warm-up, and he was curious as to how forward they would be with their questions. He knew that he certainly whetted their appetite. He would have to be careful of Sarah, though. She didn't say much, but he could tell that she was observing him and evaluating his answers to see if there were any flaws in his story. John thought that cops and therapists were similar in this respect. He used this technique often when interrogating criminals. John realized that if he were to keep talking, he would have to be truthful or keep track of any white lies. So that's the first chapter. Okay. So that gives you a sense of who the characters are. And now we're going to go to chapter 16, which is really a character sketch of the bruja. And bruja in Spanish means witch. Okay? This is a spirit that was really created to keep the universe in check, because the universe is expansive, and the bruja was created, or it wasn't the bruja, then this negative energy was to keep it from expanding too quickly, so there was balance in the universe. The problem was the church co-opted this essence, and it's now out of control. So she's now working for the Roman Catholic Church, and I refer to her as she because she can only be a female, and will always assume the body of a female. When a female dies, she assumes the body. So this is chapter 16. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Genesis 3:5, King James Version. The flight to Rome was uneventful. The bruja reflected on her new body, which she had had for more than a year. Until she inhabited this body, it had been a while since she was mortal. The last time was when she had tried to abduct John during the bank robbery. Then he shot her. She knew that her body would die, and rather than bleed to death and leave an unexplained corpse, she was able to cremate herself. She remembered that she had almost had him, and then she felt the bullet to her neck and head. She recalled the searing pain and the desire to release the body she was inhabiting, simply to quell the agony, but she held on and fled. She was able to staunch the blood flow so she wouldn't leave a trail, but this effort weakened her. Before her body died, she needed to tell the church she found him, or else they would have to start the search again. She felt her body slowly as she exited the building. She managed to limp to an alleyway where there was a door leading to a dark, dank basement. She half walked, half tumbled down the stairs. She fell to the floor and felt her breathing begin to slow. She looked around for a place to crawl behind and die. The basement housed an incinerator which burned the garbage in the building. With all the strength she had left, she opened the door to the furnace. The flames were beautiful. She was losing life and couldn't hold on much longer. Once she took her natural form, there would be no way to contact Agostino. If he couldn't collect her, she would sit there hovering until she finally dissipated. The church would have to summon her again through an elaborate ritual that would take time that she knew they were running out of. She resigned herself to this as she let the blood flow freely. With her last ounce of energy, she threw herself into the fire. A momentary shock filled her consciousness as her body was consumed by the flames. But then there was a sweet release as she assumed her natural form. She rose from the fire, her black mist form settling in a dark corner, indistinguishable from its surroundings, waiting for her lover to collect her. Unfortunately, the Vatican couldn't find her, so she remained suspended in the dark corner for weeks until her dearest Agostino finally rescued her. She was glad to be mortal again. She loved the sensations flesh allowed her to have, especially feeling her heart and blood pumping. She retained all the memories from the woman who used to inhabit her body, which was why she could feel connected and familiar with Sarah and behave and speak like the Mary that Sarah loved. This was also why she wanted to spare her. She liked Sarah, her strength, curiosity, the way she wrestled with the world and religion. Of course, these feelings she had could make her job problematic, she thought, but if she simply eliminated John, then she could spare Sarah and perhaps even offer her an opportunity to sit with her and Agostino as they ruled the world. She pondered that fantasy, finally realizing that it was just that, a fantasy. The bruja hoped that she could inhabit this body until its natural death, and then find another suitable container immediately without having to be bottled up again. She arrived at Palazzo Cardinal Sessi, her favorite hotel, and would have just enough time to shower and freshen up before she had to leave. She always enjoyed Rome's architecture and history. Every time she visited, it seemed different. She had seen many changes in its people and policies over the year, and she welcomed all of the changes with grace. What choice did she have? Things changed, and either you embraced them or not. It didn't matter. Change couldn't be avoided unless you were the Catholic Church, whose purpose was to thwart any change that would threaten their hierarchy and power. Rome reminded her of her past, almost like a scrapbook of memories lost in every other city across Earth, but open and in clear view in Rome. The Bruja predated the Church. She and the universe were created together. The universe is a constant change agent, intent on self-consciousness through evolution. The Bruja as a balance, to keep order so creation and evolution wouldn't run amok and self-destruct. The Bruja provided the yin of contraction, balancing the universe's yang of expansion. She began as pure energy, unnamed. When language evolved among humans, she was given many names: Nahash, Shaitan, Dalal, Pokwa, and Bruja being the most recent. It wasn't until humans were created that she took form, and with form came ego. Over time, her ego blotted out her universal purpose, replacing it with a personalized form of existence. After several incarnations, the Bruja lost sight completely of her true purpose of balance, entering the dream world of humanhood, and instead, when the Catholic Church franchised Christianity, she was swept up by their rhetoric and need for power, which she could give them, fulfilling her ego and their plan for dominance. Little did she know that even as a pawn of the Church, she and the Church were needed to create the eventual rebound that would catapult humanity into its final evolutionary step. The Bruja had a very long history with the Church. She was a loyal Catholic from the beginning of the Church's inception, always helping the Church achieve its aims. She was a counter-change agent, employed for centuries to guarantee that nothing would ever change for the Church, especially the second coming of the Christ. It wasn't only the present-day Church, though. She worked with the Pharisees and was instrumental in Jesus' crucifixion, spreading rumors that he wanted to usurp the power of the Pharisees. She became a follower of Jesus and was intimate with Judas Iscariot, who she convinced that Jesus would never overthrow the Romans to set their people free, and that Judas, the lion, would be the only one to do it.